Hello, in this video we are continuing to discuss Chapter 1 of Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dime When Not Getting By in America. Chapter 1 is entitled Serving in Florida, and in this video we're going to start at about page 33. On page 33, I suppose first off to recap what I've been talking about, Barbara is noting her observations about her job as a waitress in a restaurant for basically minimum wage, as her job as a server at this restaurant. She notes that she originally was working full-time at one restaurant, but that was not enough money to pay her bills. Even though she had very minimal bills, because she wasn't really spending any extra money on anything other than like food and transportation costs, right, gasoline, and her rent. But even those three expenses were so much money that she couldn't afford to survive when that $6 or $7 an hour that she ended up usually making as her job as a waitress. And it varied, of course, depending on how many tips she received. But so she needed to take a second job, right? She tried to take a second job at a restaurant called Jerry's that she thought was going to pay a little bit better, and the tips might be a little higher. It's a larger restaurant. And she notes, of course, at this restaurant how few people even return to Jerry's for a second day on the job. And she notes how very difficult it is for two people to serve, or two people to work two service jobs. And this is information on page 31 and 32. So Barbara ends up quitting her first job. Her first job was at the Hearthside Diner, and she ends up working at Jerry's now, just full time, right? On page 33, and here's an issue for the social conservatives of American society. On page 33, Barbara talks about a man that worked at Jerry's, who once worked 24 hours straight, right, 3 shifts, and then afterwards went to the bar, right, and met a beautiful girl, right, and of course then he had what he called beautiful sex with her. Of course, the bourgeoisie in this country would call this behavior despicable, right? Well, let me just say it this way. When you work 3 shifts for 24 hours as a man, what are you supposed to do with yourself afterwards? What pleasures are you supposed to get out of life when you have to work all the time just to survive? So the fact that this guy would go and find some woman and have, and engage himself in a relationship with her, it might have been just casual sex. They may never meet again or have sex again, but this is a man who in some ways, it seems, wants to assert his masculinity. He can't do that through his job. So what else does he have? What else does he even have to live for if it's not for sex? So, I'm not judging this man. I'm not going to be a member of the bourgeoisie and do so. If the bourgeoisie would ensure that their employees receive a living wage, this might not be a problem. But of course, the bourgeoisie doesn't want to do that. It wants more for itself and less for everybody else in terms of money. Well, his mind, I think, would be deadened by his work, right? And so my big issue with that is, why shouldn't he party? Or why shouldn't he be, finding some woman to fuck when he's not working? Especially when his job is so horribly self-alienating. Right? If you go back to Marx's philosophical doctrines. And in fact, in these kind of jobs, as a worker, you learn to see your customers as being enemies. It's that bad. You're taught by your corporate management not to even care at all about your customers. At least they try to instill that into your mind. And the reason is because if you view your customers as anything other than enemies, right, the demands of your customers, right, may prevent the company from maximizing their profit. And Barbara notes that on page 35. And it's this idea here that the management wants to squeeze a maximum amount of profit they can. And of course by doing so to squeeze a maximum amount of work out of each individual worker. They're wanting to make as much money as they can so they can go on their cruises and so they can maybe give all this money to their church and look really good. When as an outstanding member of their church society. Of course, these are the bourgeoisie, the people who have the luxury of being able to have religion in their life and have religion do something for them because they already have a good support structure, right? The low-wage workers are under no illusion. Jesus doesn't save them from their problems. And if they're going to sit around and pray all the time, they're going to starve, right? So they have no place in their life for Jesus or for God or for religion. They face the cold, hard reality of a world that has essentially thrown them under the bus. That being said, on page 36, Barbara notes how Christians are the types of people who tip the least and look at us being the waiters, disapprovingly no matter what we do, as if they were confusing waitressing with Mary Magdalene's original profession. Of course, that is the profession of being a prostitute. And in some ways, there's truth to that. People who become waitresses very often are proselytizing themselves. They're proselytizing their wage labor power, right? They're selling their wage labor power for tuppence, essentially, for next to nothing to these bourgeoisie exploiters. And on that same note, on page 37, Barbara notes that workers aren't even allowed to take restroom breaks, right? And I quote, while we were dismayed to discover that workers lacked an acknowledged right to void at work, the workers were amazed by outsiders' naive belief that their employers would permit them to perform this basic bodily function when necessary. Again, get it through your minds if you're a member of the bourgeoisie classes, right? The proletarians of this society are exploited. It doesn't mean that there's never the possibility of a difficulty in firing your employees. It may be difficult to fire certain employees at certain times, but you're paying them so little that even the most inefficient employees are most of the time making your company more profit than their wage would indicate. And I'm sure Barbara, based on her kind of work ethic, was making the company at least $20 an hour. Yet she gets maybe, at Jerry's, on page 39, it says that Barbara averaged $7.50 an hour at Jerry's. But again, most of that's the tips. On page 39, Barbara also notes that of my fellow servers, everyone who lacked a working husband or a boyfriend seemed to have a second job. Nita does something at a computer 8 hours a day, another welds. So this idea here is, again, by keeping the wages so low for these proletarian employees, you force two people to live together, right? And of course, because of bourgeois society's obsession with traditionalism, right? Heaven forbid it was two men living together or two women living together. That would be shocking, because clearly these two men and these two women who are living together just so that they can survive, right? And which is what's going to happen, right? They're living together so they can survive on low-wage jobs. But of course, Senator Santorum and other people like that would be like, it's a conspiracy. They're all about fucking one another every night, and they're so tired from their job probably when they come home from these pathetic low-wage jobs that they wouldn't even have the energy to fuck one another. But Senator Santorum, in his wonderful financially secure position, thinks of nothing else except what homosexuals might be doing in their own bedrooms. One wonders when we'll find out what Senator Santorum's real sexual preference is. But I digress again. I'm simply stating here that these low-wage employees basically had to live with somebody else and combine their incomes, or they wouldn't be able to have a home or even an apartment, because one income of $7.50 an hour isn't enough in 1999 to afford your own apartment. But that being said, Barbara, she tries to obtain, on page 42, she tries to obtain a second part-time job as a hotel room cleaner. Well, that lasts Barbara for one day. She can't manage the job for more than one day. On page 47, and I think this is another good quote, or a good point, Barbara, she notes that people who are being waited upon at Jerry's, at the restaurant in which she is serving, right, they're unhappy with the quality of service, right? They're unhappy that they're not getting their food in a timely manner as they would like to. And what Barbara says is these people, right, who are, they don't understand how stressful a waitress's or a waiter's job is. Right? And she notes, well, that at one point in time, this is again on page 47, there's a cook named Jesus, right, spelled the same as Jesus, but Jesus, who's the only cook one given night, right? And Barbara that night alone has 4 tables to handle by herself, right? So people aren't getting their food on time. They're waiting a long time because it takes a while for a cook probably to make all these people their meals, right? Because it's 4 tables, let alone all the people at each given table, and that's just for Barbara's table, right? So nobody's getting their food on time, which means that nobody's going to be tipping well. And one can only imagine how much the company management is making when you have all these people buying food. You have one server and a few waitresses going around to all these tables making less than $3 an hour from the company. Corporate management must be making a financial killing, right? Well, on page 48, Barbara walks out of her job at Jerry's, right? She says she can't take it anymore. She's fed up, and I wouldn't blame her, right? And, well, before we talk about Chapter 2, Scrubbing in Maine, in my next video, I just want to say the following, right? This is what I think Americans should do, is that when they complain, when Americans are complaining about their food being late, right? If they haven't read this book and don't know how difficult the job of being a waiter or a waitress is, if you're a waiter or a waitress, and this is what I would do, by the way, if I was a waiter or a waitress, and that would get me fired probably pretty quickly, or at least I'd be in big trouble with the company management. I don't know if they could fire me that easily, but they'd probably figure out some other way to fire me, right? Claim something about me that isn't true, like I stole something even when I didn't. Because, of course, if I'm a low-wage worker, I can't afford a lawyer to defend myself. So they'll make an excuse for firing me. But anyway, if I was a waitress or a waiter, based on this chapter of Nickel and Dimed, I would tell the people at my table the following. I'm sorry. We're doing everything we can, but we're understaffed at this restaurant. Please, instead of taking your anger out on me, blame the CEOs. Blame the other members of the corporate management. They're making millions. They are the reason your food is late. They don't want to have this restaurant properly staffed because they want to squeeze as much work out of us as they can. And sometimes that means that your food is going to be late. I apologize. That's reality in American 21st century bourgeois society in which 1% of the population controls 43% of the nation's wealth. And if you don't believe me, I suggest you read a book like Nickel and Dime by Barbara Ehrenreich, or simply go online and type in wage disparity United States of America. You'll find out what America is all about, the kind of society this society is. Well, in my next video, I'm going to talk about Scrubbing in Maine, Chapter 2 of Nickel and Dime. Thank you for watching.